no mai hara mai. Ko Shannon Dowsing toko ingoa, and welcome to the Exchange Cafe. At the Exchange Cafe, we share ideas and knowledge around climate solutions. Now, we're really fortunate today to have Rewiring Aotearoa with us. And they've just released a report on the fact that New Zealand is one of the only countries to have passed a tipping point where electrification is now the cheapest way for us to fuel our lives. We'll definitely put a link in the description, but let's jump into that call.
Kia ora Shannon. Ko mako Rewi toko ingoa, he uri tēnei o Ngāi Tahu me Ngāti Kahungunu ki Wairoa. Ko au te kaiwhakarite o Rewiring Aotearoa. So, yeah, Shannon, we've met before. I'll be waiting on you and Jonathan to open up that studio down here and get some cool stuff rangatahi going. Part of Rewiring Aotearoa. I was part of the core foundation of Rewiring Aotearoa and the crew that put Rewiring Aotearoa together. Really grown from a seed planted at a conference called Toru in Glenorchy that we were at, where we heard a guy called Dr. Sol Griffith speak around the electrification mahi he's doing in America and Australia and their respective our counterparts Rewiring America and Australia. My role in Rewiring Aotearoa is to really just ensure that the community in iwi are brought on the journey that we're trying to take our whole country on. As I said in my mihi then, I've got a lot of whānau on Wairoa, and so a lot of the impact of cyclone was also felt to my whānau. So I'm really passionate about bringing some energy resilience, but also some financial freedom through electrification that our whānau are going to be able to feel on the other side. That's me. That's what I'm here for and what I'm trying to achieve. So kia ora, I'll pass it on to David.
Kia ora tātou, ko David Hall toko ingoa, he tangata Tiriti ahau. I hail from North Canterbury ways, but living in Tāmaki Makaurau these days. And along with Mike, part of that original crew that laid the foundations for Rewiring Aotearoa, and I continue to have a relationship with it as a policy advisor. But yeah, my mahi is in climate action more generally. So I work with Rewiring Aotearoa. I work with the Toha Network, which is has its headquarters in Gizzy out east, and has been doing post-cyclone initiatives through the East Coast Exchange and so on. And also retain a relationship to AUT University. So I teach a course there on climate action, and also am a lead researcher on the AUT Living Laboratories program, which does kind of experimental sites for nature-based solutions around the Hauraki Gulf.
Awesome. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Shannon. My name's Ben Fahy. I'm not far away from Mike over in Wanaka, and joined relatively recently around, mostly focused on communications and trying to tell that story and sell that story, I guess, around electrification, both to consumers and hopefully some politicians who can make those decisions, helping, kind of working with the policy team and Mike and around media relations. My background's media and journalism, so finding all those angles and those hooks really to get people on board. So it's so far that our report, that was a fun media blitz, I think, and hopefully there's a lot of people who have become aware of this, and over the next few years when they do need to make those decisions, that it's in their mind and they can call back on it. So some pretty powerful work and a really interesting equity discussion as well around giving access to everyone who, everyone should be able to benefit from this technology. So that's what we're aiming for.
Look, let's start with the report, I guess. And there's a great number of findings in there, and very interesting that you referred to New Zealand as being one of the first countries that's reached a tipping point where our cost of energy now is high enough. The cost of fossil fuel-based energy, I guess, is now high enough that switching to electrification will actually save us money do you want to expand on that slightly? And we'll obviously bring up some graphics from the report and things to highlight this as you talk. But who wants to discuss that?
Yeah, I could take the lead on that. So yeah, the idea of a tipping point is just that, circumstances have become such that all we need to do is take little nudges just to push us over the edge. And as you say, like the high fossil fuel costs is one of those, especially for Aotearoa, New Zealand. And another fact is just these global trends insofar as the cost of small scale renewable electricity generation like rooftop solar, home batteries, other sorts of electrification assets. The price of these is coming down at the same time, and so that just means when you add that up, we're at this point where the business case for this just adds up in a different way than it used to. It used to not necessarily be as affordable. So now, a household can save on average $1,500 on their bills, on their energy bills per year. That's assuming a low cost of finance, a concessionary cost of finance. It's and yeah. So that just means costs over time that households are reducing and then reducing their cost of living as a consequence of that.
Yep. So if we take let's take the cost of finance out of the equation, because very few of us have the ability to affect that. Perhaps the government obviously may subsidize these initiatives, and that could be the mechanism to give that low cost of finance. But the equation seems to be based a little bit around around inclusivity of a new vehicle. When I look at the stats, so electrifying your fleet versus having a petrol vehicle. Now, in both cases, I guess it's implying that you buy a new vehicle. At what point for someone like a family in Tairāwhiti who probably isn't going to be buying a new vehicle, does it become sensible for them? They're likely to continue with their fossil fuel powered second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand vehicle for quite some time.
Yeah. So the one of the largest parts of energy costs for a household is the costs of fuel for running their car. And so by switching over to electricity, the benefits by switching over to an electric vehicle, the benefits are immediate. So you're immediately reducing that cost for petrol. And if it's combined with rooftop solar, then you're essentially getting the energy to run the car for free. The real issue here is that household is going to have to carry the debt to get those assets. And that's really the key here, is that from a cash flow perspective, you're immediately better off as long as you're able to carry that debt. And I think that's where the focus for future work needs to be, in regards to making sure that that debt can be accessed equally. There's no inequality in accessing that debt, and that the cost of that debt is enabling those cost savings to be carried by the household. And there's a real role here for policy and for more inclusive finance to ensure that it's not just the households that have good savings and good access to debt which are enjoying the benefits of the energy transition, and they're the ones making the transition first, and therefore they're exposed to those cost savings. We need to make sure that we're bringing everyone along on this, and the households who could benefit the most from those reduced energy costs, that they're going to be able to make that transition, and they're going to be able to access those cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, sorry, Shannon, that Mike Casey talks about, and he's lucky. He had lots of capital, and he decided to, when he was creating his farm, to just buy all of these electric machines instead of fossil fuel machines. And one of the kind of founders, I guess, the spirit animal of Rewiring America, and who was involved in setting up Rewiring Australia and also Rewiring New Zealand, talks about climate change as a machines problem. You swap fuel for finance, and a lot of these machines will come to the end of their life at some point, and that's part of this, is saying when that happens, you want the next decision to be electric because it makes economic sense now. So and people are at different stages on that journey. They'll have different machines that might break down, and you want them to make that decision. There may be people who are building a new house. You want them to make the decision at that time to put all of these different machines, these electric machines in, rather than fossil fuel machines that will have another 15 years of life and another 15 years of fuel. That is expensive. So I think when you look at it that way, it's about whenever the time comes, it's a good decision. It's a good decision for economically now, and also from an emissions perspective.
And just to add what David and Ben have said, there is a lot of work that we can do now with whānau and communities, and a lot of that's in building the capability to make these decisions. So when that time does come to purchase that new asset, it will be the right decision. A lot of the work that we're doing, at the moment in the likes of South Auckland, when you do a quick scan of the high interest instant finance loans to purchase these vehicles, there's better financial decisions that can be made for whānau around the vehicle they choose, the loan type that they can get from a better interest rate. So whānau are already making these decisions. We just need to make sure that they've got the capability and the comfort to actually make the right decision.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see more of these vehicles, more attractive options of vehicles in the second-hand market as well, which achieves the same thing, right? Like, I'm still driving 20, 25-year-old cars. I'm not. I enjoy rescuing them from the junkyard instead of creating something new. But when there are options that I can rescue in the electric fleet, then that's when it's really going to be attractive to me.
Yeah, and that's one of the actually the sort of side effects of the clean car discount, the policy that did subsidize cars, which the previous government had instated, was, the plan was just to get that stock of EVs moving so that some of them would start to trickle down into secondhand markets. So yeah, hopefully, even though that policy has been suspended, at the same time the costs of EVs are reducing, and so we hope that that access to secondhand EVs will increase over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we all hope they do, because I wouldn't mind whipping around in one instead of my Volvo. But so the next part to me that really stood out was around well, again, like putting it back into the context of communities like this. I know that there's a large LPG usage and natural gas usage in this region, for example. I personally have it as well, and at the time I made the decision, it was a really cost-effective way to heat water, for example. Now I've seen endless changes in the increase in price in those LGB in those gas cylinders and fills. Are you guys, is this these economics, are they like shifting every day and getting more in favor of electrification? Because they seem to be for me.
I mean, there's two things going on here. Firstly, the economics of fossil fuels can shift every day because they're extremely volatile markets. LPG and natural gas a little less so, because that's mostly from domestic supply. But if we're talking about petrol and oil, obviously we're talking about global markets, which shift a lot depending on what the oil producing countries, the sorts of decisions that they're making about supply. And we've also seen events recently like the invasion of Ukraine, and that having flow-on effects for fossil fuel prices globally. So So in that regards, the price of fossil fuels can be extremely volatile. And when you make commitments to these sorts of assets, which last for years and decades, you're really exposing yourself to that volatility for years and decades ahead. Whereas on the renewables and the electrification side, the costs are generally on a downward trajectory because a lot of these are new technologies. There's a lot of room for innovation and for increasing efficiencies. And so that's why the cost of all of these, electrified alternatives like heat pumps and, heat pump water heaters and so on, other forms of, electrified alternatives for what fossil fuels used to do is just getting more and more efficient over time. There may be some volatility in the future around some of these assets, depending on access to critical minerals, and some mining bottlenecks. But the thought is that generally we're on a kind of long-term cost reduction for these assets because there's just so much innovation still to go. Whereas on the fossil fuel side, we've had centuries of innovation and they've squeezed about as much energy as they can out of oil, gas, and coal. You're just not seeing those same kind of trends. So that's a big part of our argument is that when you're making those decisions and you're buying these assets, what do you want to expose yourself into the future? And we'd argue that the better bet is going to be the electrified version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was like you, Shannon. I built in 2019, and I'm on LPG as well. And I like that example because you're only as good as what you know. And it wasn't until I was at Toru and had these conversations, and they were real upfront conversations, that I started to realize, the not only the harm that I was doing by choosing LPG, but the cost analysis on the cost benefits of going solar or going heat pump to heat your water. Just like you, it's more cost effective for LPG, but if you take the lifetime of those the heat pumps and or the lifetime of that LPG, it's actually more cost effective to go the electric heating over the lifetime of those products. So that's what we're trying to say is that over the lifetime of those products, you save around $7,000 compared to LPG, and that's what we're trying to inform our whānau.
Yep. I guess that brings me on to the next point, and this is around energy in general, and and certainly around solar panels, load soothing. I have, I've got two accounts. I've got my commercial building where we work from, and I've got my home. Not at home to use my solar panels during the day. I'm at my work, so it feels like I should be putting them onto this building, and yet it shouldn't matter where I generate that electricity, right? Like I should, if I generate it, I should have access to it. How do we deal with putting electricity back into the network and getting a fair price for it?
This is the question Mike's usually pretty good at, because that's something that Mike Casey, our CEO, is going through at the moment with his cherry orchard farm. He's able to store the solar that he is with his array of batteries on his farm. What the industry hasn't figured out yet, or isn't built to or designed for, is how he can profit from actually selling that back to the grid. Essentially we want to create a network of solar hubs or solar batteries or houses with solar batteries that can actually profit and benefit from giving back to the grid as well. In terms of when you're using that electricity, that's when batteries are really effective, or really behavior changes as well around, what time you're using appliances, how you're using appliances, but also the storage of that, that energy through other means like hot water cylinders is a good example that Mike and Josh also use. So yeah, I think the industry hasn't really figured that out yet on how we can feed back into the grid and make it all actually profitable for households, but it's definitely something that's been is working through at the moment.
Yeah, I live in an apartment block that has its own solar array as well, and we went through this process as well, trying to export some of that surplus excess electricity to the wider community and to whānau around us. But again, couldn't get through some of those barriers around around how the distribution network is set up and what's in place to enable that. So there's an enormous opportunity for us to make our grids and distribution networks more flexible to enable that two-way transfer of electricity. And ultimately that potentially creates a much more resilient grid, and that's something that'll be front of mind for Tairāwhiti, because that exposure to our current grid is a very centralized grid where you've got a few very large electricity generators which export that electricity nationally, but that kind of system is quite highly exposed to weather events like Cyclone Gabriel, potential wildfire and so on. You've got these transmission lines exposed to these sorts of hazards, and then you can knock out electricity for whole communities. Whereas if you start to move into a more decentralized system with a lot of distributed energy assets around, rooftop solar, different wind turbines around, and so on, it's harder for a weather event to take out to disrupt that system, because you've got lots of different forms of supply. And if you coordinate in between them, then it means that weather events might knock out a couple of assets but not all assets, and so they can serve as the backup. So there's a real argument here that we can create much more resilient energy systems by embracing distributed energy and finding out ways to distribute between more effective ways to do that. I think it's an interesting point here, just a wider point that we're on the cusp of this big energy transition, and we often talk about it as a transition from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy. And that is an important dimension of it. But the other dimension is this transition from centralized energy systems to more decentralized systems, because all these things like rooftop solar and batteries and so on are more accessible. And so technology is also driving this shift into a more decentralized system. So the challenge for us is to make the most of that for everybody.
So Shannon, there's a general sense of kind of unfairness with the current system, as you say. Like if you generate some electricity, you should be benefiting from that at the same way as a big generator should. At the moment, individuals and small kind of generators, I guess you'd call them, don't get paid very well. It's not fair. That's one thing we're asking for, is for the system to be changed to reflect that generation. So there is more incentive, and there's other countries have done that pretty well. Australia is doing it, and in the UK they're doing it. There's a lot of innovation around that, because there is a business opportunity as well for people. So it's not just a cost saving measure to have solar and batteries. It can actually be a business opportunity for some people. You can make money from it. And increasingly with some of these new cars, new EVs that can go from, you've got a huge battery sitting in your driveway that can be used, to provide energy for a community or to be sold back into the grid. So there's some quite interesting opportunities in that area, and a lot of innovation that's happening. We just need to change the rules really to reflect what's happening in the technology that are available.
So who are the rules with? Who's the bottleneck with? Because as I understand it, there's sort of three players in the game, right? There's distribution, then transmission, and then there's the retailer. I can't imagine the retailer cares. The smirk there may tell me otherwise. But I guess for me, it's either distribution protecting their industry, or it's transmission not accepting it because they're not because they have the burden of cost to get from their major suppliers, which is quite often remote from cities, and it means the economics don't work out to maintain those lines if they can get it local. But I don't know. I guess I wonder why it's so difficult to get this over the line, or is it just because the dribs and drabs of community power are so difficult at the moment to rely on, that actually maybe a collectivization needs to occur, and then it be sold back into the retailer as a collective instead of individuals. But I'm not I don't know who's blocking the way to this.
I mean, these are big complex system problems. You know, the energy system is a complicated system with a lot of different players, with a lot of different interests and motives. And so these things are never difficult to solve, and there's no one easy fix here. But to pick up on some of the themes that you've kind of alluded to, I mean, some of the problems are just genuine fixed infrastructure, and the fixed infrastructure doesn't enable what we're talking about here with a distributed energy and being able to orchestrate supply and demand, because the Australian example has shown that a flood of rooftop solar did create some issues for networks, because suddenly you had this flood of new supply, and at times it could create too much supply for the network to manage, and so there were outages, and they had to sort of block some of that supply from rooftop solar to manage that. So it wasn't the most efficient way of dealing with that uplift, that surge of rooftop solar. So there is genuine challenges here, and addressing those infrastructure challenges takes time, and takes a coordinated approach amongst those players, and that requires as well, we've got many EDBs who are all operating independently, and like, how do you to some extent it's institutional problems around how do you take a coordinated approach amongst all of these different EDBs around what distribution should look like in the future. There are great groups like Flex Forum, which are doing that, but this is kind of work underway. And then obviously from a retail perspective, like as our report found, if you're getting electricity from your rooftop, that is just the cheapest electricity, cheapest energy you can get, and so immediately there's an economic incentive there to go down that path and to maximize your benefits. And especially if you're electrifying all of those different things in your house, you're cutting out energy costs through all of these areas like cooking and heating and transport and so on. So it makes a lot of sense. The retailers obviously, if their business model is based around supplying that electricity at a higher price, then obviously there's conflict of interest there. But like, certainly from a rewiring perspective, we don't see ourselves as in competition or being a substitute to the grid. Like, the grid is still an essential piece of infrastructure. It may just play a different role as a greater number of households and businesses and farms start generating their own electricity. Then the grid is still going to play an absolutely essential role in providing electricity for industry. And the electricity demand of industry is going to go up as well, because they're going to need to electrify a lot of their processes, which they've been relying on gas and coal and other fossil fuels for. So that's part of it. Overall, the demand for electricity will go up. So, there's still an important role for the grid there, also as serving backup for households and businesses. And also, not all houses are going to be able to use rooftop solar as well. It's not necessarily going to be economic for all households. Our report was treating New Zealand households on average, but of course there are some households which might be in heavily shaded areas where the yield that they're going to get from their rooftop solar just might not stack up in the same way. And so we need to make sure that that they still have access to electricity, because it's in this day and age, having access to energy is an important right that we need to have flourishing lives, and it needs to be affordable electricity. So we're certainly not proposing that the grid becomes redundant. It's just about finding space for us all to play, and to ultimately to deliver the best value for energy users, and to make sure that that they're benefiting from all of this new technology that's just coming through.
I guess that brings us on really well into sort of what are the most interesting innovations in both sort of private and publicly owned energy infrastructure and services. What's going on out there that is really kind of making you say that this is happening. This is going to be amazing.
I mean, I think the most spectacular story here is not new innovation. It's actually just those cost reductions in technologies which have been around for ages. I mean, solar panels have been around for decades. The difference is in 2010, say, what's that, 14 years ago, the cost of electricity from a solar PV panel was more than 700 times the cheapest fossil fuel alternative. And by 2022, it was 29% less than that cheapest fossil fuel alternative. So you're just seeing extraordinary cost reductions. And that just comes from, a few governments around the world making a commitment to solar PV and playing a major role in their future energy systems, making investments into that technology and then driving down the cost of that over time. And so we're seeing that now in batteries as well, which is another, not a new technology, but an old technology, but like the chemistry is massively improving. They're using different chemistries. The batteries can last longer. They've got more dynamic potential that they can, power cars and very effectively. So it's really like I think the biggest story is that, and like a lot of people just haven't caught up to the fact that those cost reductions happened globally, and that just has completely reoriented our opportunities for embracing things like rooftop solar. We've always had early adopters and people who have invested in that technology when it was expensive, but now there's an opportunity for everybody to invest in it when it's cheaper. Yeah, in terms of new technologies which are kind of coming up, like I think a real exciting thing is the V2G, vehicle to grid capability. So cars, just as a matter of fact, being able to export the electricity that they have in their batteries back to the household. And that's, just starting to come through the market now. And that's really going to open up that potential for cars to serve that role as battery storage, and to make households quite energy independent in that regard. As Ben was saying earlier, when in the near future, when you buy a car, you're essentially buying your house battery on wheels, and like being able to drive around town is kind of a co-benefit to having that storage, which you'll be able to use in your house in the evenings and in the mornings when the solar's not necessarily working. And that just kind of enables it really enables the household to become a whole package, and to have all of those energy needs and those assets working together in a really sophisticated way. And then there is also technology emerging around smart meters, which helps to facilitate the supply and demand at the household or small business level, and just to help to make sure that electricity is being distributed the most optimal way between storage and supply, and ensuring that you're using your appliances at the best time of the day, and so on and so forth.
I think I got really so two things you hit on, particularly the duration we've had this technology. I trained in telecommunications a lot longer than 15 years ago now, and so when we were installing sites up the coast from here, it was always solar, big battery arrays to maintain service in any conditions. A lot of them were solar only, and required that investment to keep the coast available for phone lines. And yeah, like the size of the lead acid battery arrays and the panels we're putting up at the time were extreme compared to what we get now. And so, yeah, I've definitely observed that change personally over that duration, and now see what's happening in the off-grid market, in particular, like the small house market, and even campers and things like that are embracing this really well. So I love seeing the change in technology. But the other part that I guess spins off that is that we still have that community that has to go through a vast change, right? We don't have, it's pretty rare to see solar on a roof here. So I guess starting with the new build people, starting with those who can make that choice immediately, what would we be saying to people building a new home in the region? Right? Is it that the technology's there and they just need to look up these couple of things, like what was it, EV2, vehicle to grid? Sorry,
V2G, yeah.
V2G, yeah. Do they just look that up and that's the spec they want in the vehicle they're getting, or where do we go for information on like what that new building should include?
Yeah, well, I mean, in that context, there's an important potential role here for the banks, and we've got a partnership with ASB where we're exploring some of this and the opportunity to use the mortgage as a vehicle for enabling that electrification, especially upfront. So that's definitely there's an opportunity there, but I think as well there's great opportunities for electrifying existing assets, existing builds, especially in regards to choices around insulation versus electrification. Putting in heat pumps is a lot cheaper than insulating a house, and obviously insulating a house can be really really important from an energy demand perspective, that you need to use less energy and electricity to heat your house, but also it costs a lot of money to insulate your house, and that can happen over it can be a long process, and in a way putting in heat pumps can help to do that even quicker. So there's opportunities here to use existing instruments like mortgages to enable that. But obviously there's equity issues here because not everyone's holding a mortgage. There's many people who are renting their houses rather than owning, and so this is part of the challenge, and part of what we need to do with Rewiring Aotearoa is we've got a strong principle around equality and making sure that everyone benefits from the energy transition, and we don't leave people behind, and that especially those households as whānau who are going to benefit most from this, that they're getting access to these technologies so that they can have warm and healthy homes and lower energy costs. So it may well require a combination of finance and policy, and the solutions aren't necessarily available now, but that's something that we want to push hard for. Mike, you might have something to add to this.
Yeah, exactly right. I think there's a big part that we're wanting to play as well, is that as whānau are struggling to make these decisions, we want to build that capability within our communities to make informed decisions. We're big fans of saying that we're trying to impact the decisions that are made around a dinner table, and how do we do that? So I think, to your question, Shannon, we'd love to be the conduit to that information for whānau, and that's what we're going to try to achieve. And you'll see us in communities and working with whānau and iwi and hapu to really build that capability, make more informed decisions. When it goes to when it goes to building a new house, or when it goes to, as David says, talking to your landlord around the conditions of your current house you're renting, we want to really be able to empower everybody, no matter where they are on the housing spectrum.
Yeah,
There's a lot
because
of knowledge that required, I think, for some of those decisions. And we do get influenced by builders and plumbers and people who maybe have different incentives. And so we've had a few stories through our website, where people have had to, this is probably more when they had good intentions and they wanted to do it for climate reasons. Maybe back in the day, they had to push really hard to get those electric appliances put in because they were getting told you should put gas in, or you should, gas hot water. And so they had to push. We're hoping that when a report like this comes out and people start talking about it and they understand that this is the best economic decision, that some of those owners, if they're building, will make that decision. They will push back and say, well, I know that it's the cheapest thing to do now, so I would like this in my house. We need to do some work around industry as well, and there is a big opportunity there for industry to switch from what they are currently offering, maybe, and then into electrification. There'll be a lot of jobs created through electrification. A lot of requirements for training as well to make sure that we can make it smooth and easy. But there is a lot of different influences along those decision points that hopefully this is all in service of some of this report, and this information is just a good kind of rational point, and that people can make that call now and push for it a bit harder.
Great. So I guess the new builds one end of the spectrum. What's the low hanging fruit then? So the dinner table discussions that you mentioned, Michael, what are we making decisions about at the moment, or is it still in the state of awareness and just knowing that you should be focusing on small steps to progress there, but what are the first steps?
Yeah, I think for me and in my role, the low-hanging fruit is actually building that capability to have those discussions, whether it's with your landlord or whether it's you are in the position to have your own new build, like Ben said, to have those informed discussions with builders. I'm a product of what Ben's mentioning. I'm no builder, and so I was going off the advice of my builder when I made those decisions. I think for whānau that are renting, there's energy efficiency around appliances and those discussions they can have with landlords. But I reckon there's actually some real power in those conversations around EVs. Like we've discussed, there's and this would be really good for Tairāwhiti in particular, is the second-hand EV market. Like you can get a good Nissan Leaf off the second-hand market that's affordable, and that's a good example of a vehicle that can power households. It's two-directional. It's what it's used for in Japan, and it's what we're actually at Manatahuna looking at putting our existing fleet through from our Mazda CX-5s at the moment. We did a cost benefit analysis when we changed to BYDs as well, and we were cost neutral when we changed from our diesel powered CX-5s through to BYDs. And what that meant to me was that if you had a whānau, and they were brand new BYDs, if we were to get those second hand, it would be a lot cheaper. And what that meant to me was unlocking more finances for whānau that could make that decision as well. So we got brand new BYDs. If we got second hand, we would become cost negative, and we would actually save money that we could spend on heating, food, or whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's where our community's certainly heading. We talk about lifetime cost instead of upfront cost a lot, but in our community, it's very much upfront cost. That's the barrier to entry. And we've seen successful trials with things like introduction of insulation for homes, which has been great for our community. You can apply for support to have your home insulated, but this could make a logical next step around electrification of the community to assist in cost of living. And so really we're kind of back to the start of the conversation, right? With how do you influence decision makers to put these things in progress? And I'm sure that you guys are out there fighting the good fight for a lot of us at the moment. We're next for you guys.
Yeah, I'll just touch on one thing really quickly, is that really important that towards what David was saying is that we don't want the healthy homes to be reformed that it doesn't include insulation. We actually want to probably expansion of some policies that includes the inclusion of things like solar or heat pumps to whānau in their homes. So really want to advocate for both those being really powerful. For us and building that capability, we've got a lot of work to do in the community, and we're kicking that off this month. We're down in Rakiura. We're big believers of, mana motuhake and communities, telling us what's really the best solution for them, and that's how we are going to roll out our community engagement, and it's going to be meaningful engagement. So we go down to Rakiura, where I'm actually from, but it's not up to me to tell that community what the best solution is for them. There's a community that's been fighting for decades on a equitable power solution for them. They're paying way above market rates, and it's hitting them in the pocket. And so for us, it's about engaging meaningfully, being on the ground in these communities, and talking and helping and walking these communities through what possible solutions could be for them. So Rakiura is on there, and Tairāwhiti is 100% on the next up list as well.
Yeah. These remote communities all suffer for their remoteness, right? It's those transmission distances and the cost of service spiral out of control. And once you average it out across the community, it's painful for them. And I think we've seen some good changes even in the approach by transmission companies and the desire to move them away from end of line homes and supporting into smaller solar units to get those end of network properties. But it's incentivized both ways there, right? Like the transmission company gets to get rid of some burden while still providing a service.
Mike, Casey is an interesting example, and this is probably what we're talking about before around some of the innovation. Some of those companies have recognized that there's an opportunity there to maybe offset some of the costs required for upgrades if they can use their customers in a different way. So they are doing a trial with him where he sends energy back when the wholesale price is high enough. So, and then they will on-sell that and make some money from that network. There are other examples like Solar Zero, which is basically doing the same thing. But renting your roof, you get a set price for your electricity, and then they will on-sell that when the price is high enough and make it, so it benefits both ways. The price might be slightly higher for users, but there's an interesting opportunity there to optimize what we already have. We already have a very good grid. We can use it more effectively, really, and hopefully benefit both ways.
Yeah, I guess that's
I got to shoot. Sorry. Give us a message, Shannon, when you're down. Hope you catch up for coffee.
No worries. I'm down there this afternoon, so over the next couple of days, bro.
Kia ora.
Good to speak, Mike. Kia ora. Look, we're pretty much ready to wrap anyway, guys. We've got through an hour of really interesting conversation. I guess that last point I was going to make was just that around that Solar Zero model and whether there is it seems like to me there is the opportunity to do the same thing but in a collectivization instead of a company taking all of the benefit. Have something that you can opt into that gives you the benefit of a company. But yeah, I guess it's a job for another day for someone to come up with that business model.
100%.
That's coming.
I think at the end of the day, I mean, like these are kind of people-sized energy assets, and the ultimate is for us to own them. As Mike said, mana motuhake is an important kind of principle, and the fact that these energy assets can be owned can maximize that opportunity for communities and households to really stake their claim and be as autonomous and self-sufficient as possible. And scaling that up to the community scale for areas up in Tairāwhiti and so on, there's an amazing opportunity there. And I think what Mike was talking about with Rakiura and to an extent what our CEO Mike Casey does with his orchard farm, there's an important element here of demonstration and having that demonstration effect and just showing what can be done with this. And then, if we can show that in places like Rakiura, on an island, it sort of shows what could be done in, remote communities, which are kind of, land-based islands often, that they're remote enough that they're kind of on their own in a similar way. And so if it can be done there, it could be done anywhere in Aotearoa. And so, that's what we're hoping to show as part of our mission over the next few years.
Amazing. Well, look, thanks for joining me. It's been really enjoyable to go through. I guess not just your report. We only touched on that briefly, but we'll add links to that here because it does have some fascinating outcomes, and I think realistically, those reports are amazing for decision makers. But we got a lot more into what people can do personally in this conversation. So thank you for that. So thank you to Michael, who's dropped off, and David and Ben. It's been amazing. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon.